The quiet love, from heartbreak to honest rebuilding. I always thought the beginning of love was loud, explosive, even, like the crash of thunder in the middle of a summer night, sharp and undeniable. But ours wasn't like that. It was quiet, so quiet that I didn't even notice it happening until I was already too deep to crawl out. There wasn't a specific moment, no cinematic glance across a crowded room or breathless, awkward confession. It began the way fog creeps over a lake at dawn, slow and all-encompassing. Back then, I wasn't even sure I was looking for anything at all. I had been in and out of relationships that felt more like negotiations than connections, all passion but no peace, all spark but no stability. I'd convinced myself that maybe that was what love was, a balancing act between desire and detachment. So when I met her, it didn't feel like a storm. It felt like exhaling, like I'd been holding my breath for years and hadn't realized it. She wasn't the most beautiful woman in the room, not in the conventional sense. But there was something about the way she moved, the way she observed instead of demanded attention. She didn't try to impress, which made her unforgettable. And she noticed things. Small, insignificant things most people overlooked. She remembered the color of the thread on the hem of my sleeve, the way my voice dropped when I was anxious, the subtle shift in my laugh when I was forcing it. Being seen like that was terrifying at first. It felt invasive, like she had a key to something inside me that even I didn't know existed. But over time, it became comforting. I started looking forward to the sound of her footsteps approaching, the cadence of her breath when she was lost in thought. We were both cautious, both carrying the remnants of past hurts like mismatched luggage. She never asked me to unpack mine, and I didn't ask her to open hers. Yet somehow, we traveled lighter together. We started spending more time together under the guise of coincidence. She'd run into me at the coffee shop near my apartment, or I'd happen to be at the bookstore she loved when she was there. Eventually, we stopped pretending it was unplanned. She came over one evening with a half-eaten box of strawberries and a film camera. "I want to remember this," she said, "before it becomes anything, before we ruin it." That was the first time she spoke out loud what I had been thinking. That whatever this was, it was delicate. And we were both so good at breaking things. But we didn't ruin it, not at first. In fact, the first year was a college of tender moments. Dancing in the kitchen to music from a phone speaker, lying on the floor and talking about what we would have done differently at 17, sharing secrets in the dark, as if speaking them in daylight would make them too real. She had a habit of slipping notes into the pockets of my jackets, little scraps of paper with quotes, song lyrics, or absurd doodles. Once, when I was having a terrible day, I found a folded note in my wallet that just said, "Breathe. You're doing better than you think." I never told her, but I kept that one tucked in the lining of my phone case for months. There were fights, of course, stupid ones, about dishes, forgotten texts, tone of voice. But we had this rule: never go to sleep angry. No matter how heated things got, one of us would always reach out first. Sometimes just a hand under the blanket, other times a whispered apology. We learned to fight without cruelty, to disagree without dismantling each other. I thought that meant we were invincible. But love doesn't unravel in dramatic scenes, at least not always. Sometimes it frays quietly, like a sweater that starts to come apart at the cuff, one loose thread pulled gently over time. Looking back, I can pinpoint when the unraveling began. It wasn't a betrayal or a screaming match. It was a silence. A single evening when she sat next to me on the couch, closer than ever, yet I felt miles away. We watched an entire movie without saying a word, and when it ended, she didn't look at me. She just stood up and went to bed. I stayed on the couch, wondering when that distance had crept in. I convinced myself it was just a bad day. We all have them. But then there were more days like that. More quiet dinners, more conversations that never started, more laughter that didn't reach her eyes. I started overcompensating, planning weekend getaways, buying her favorite snacks, asking her how she was more often. She smiled and said everything was fine. I knew it wasn't. I just didn't know how to ask the right question. Or maybe I was afraid of the answer. We still had good days, enough to convince me it wasn't falling apart. She'd still trace shapes on my hand while we watched TV. She'd still hum while cooking. But the notes stopped. I hadn't even noticed until one day I reached into my coat pocket and realized it had been months since I'd found one. It was such a small thing, and yet it cracked something in me. I didn't bring it up. I didn't want her to feel guilty. But I think she noticed the shift in me, too. We started performing the relationship rather than living in it. We knew what to do, how to hold hands, what to say when people asked how we were, but the spark behind it was flickering. Not gone, just dimmed. I told myself that was normal. No one stays in the honeymoon phase forever. But part of me missed being missed being looked at the way she used to, like I was something precious. One night, I found her sitting on the balcony, wrapped in a blanket, staring out into the dark. I watched her from the doorway, wondering if she was trying to feel something. Anything. She didn't turn around. I left her there and went to bed, the ache in my chest heavier than it had ever been. Days passed, then weeks, and we started functioning like roommates who remembered they used to be lovers. We kissed goodbye in the mornings, but our lips didn't linger. We ate dinner together, but our minds were elsewhere. I think we were both waiting for the other to say it. That maybe we'd reached the end. But saying it would make it real. And we weren't ready for that, so we stayed. Out of hope. Out of fear. And in that limbo, the distance grew until one day, I realized I didn't remember the last time I felt truly close to her. That terrified me more than anything. Because if we could lose each other without a fight, what did that say about what we had? Maybe that's the worst kind of ending. Not the ones that break your heart, but the ones that fade so slowly you don't notice until there's nothing left. But I wasn't ready to let go. Not yet. Not without trying one more time to reach her. So I made a plan. Something simple. Something that might remind her, and me, of what we used to be. I didn't know if it would work. I didn't even know if she wanted it to. But I had to try. Because love deserves at least that much. A last breath before the silence swallows everything. I spent the entire afternoon preparing for that night. Not with grand gestures or dramatic surprises, but with the kind of quiet intentionality that once defined our love. I went back to the little bookstore where we first, accidentally, bumped into each other. The one where she used to run her fingers across the spines like she was feeling for a pulse. I found a copy of her favorite poetry collection. Out of print, worn at the corners, but the same edition she'd once lent me and never asked to be returned. I bought it, wrapped it in a plain paper bag, and slipped a note inside like she used to do for me. Just one line, written in the same ink she used to love. Do you still feel it too? Or am I the only one holding on? I placed it on her side of the bed before she came home, lit a single candle on the windowsill, and played the album we always used to dance to. Low, gentle, unassuming. When she walked in, her eyes landed on the book almost immediately. She didn't say anything at first. She just stared at it. Then at me, and then, slowly, she sat down on the edge of the bed and opened it. She read the note. Her face didn't change. She closed the book gently, like it was something fragile, and set it on the nightstand without a word. My heart sank. I'd expected tears, a conversation, of something. But instead, there was only quiet. I asked her if she wanted to talk. She nodded, barely, and I sat beside her. What followed was not a confession or confrontation. It was a long, aching unraveling. She told me she'd been feeling hollow. That something had shifted in her, not necessarily because of me, but because of everything. The world, the weight of days. The quiet suffocation of routine. She said it scared her how numb she'd become, how easy it was to drift. She missed herself, not just us. And she didn't know how to get back. I listened. I didn't interrupt. I didn't try to fix it. I just let her speak until the words stopped coming. And when they did, I asked her one question. "Do you still want to try?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she leaned her head on my shoulder and whispered, "I don't know." It wasn't the answer I wanted, but it was honest. More honest than anything we'd said in weeks. That night, we slept in the same bed but didn't touch. And somehow it felt more intimate than any kiss we'd shared recently. We were finally confronting the space between us, not pretending it wasn't there. The following weeks were filled with uncomfortable truths. We talked more, and for once, not just about logistics or work or dinner plans. We talked about how we'd let ourselves stop showing up fully. How we started avoiding the hard conversations for the sake of peace, not realizing that peace without connection was just silence in disguise. I told her I missed her notes. She told me she stopped writing them when she didn't think I noticed anymore. That hurt because I had noticed. I just hadn't said anything. I assumed she knew. But love doesn't survive on assumptions. It needs acknowledgement, care, and sometimes uncomfortable vulnerability. We agreed to start over, not with grand declarations or renewed promises, but with simple intentions. One day at a time. One moment of effort at a time. We went back to the coffee shop, sat at our old spot near the window. She wore the scarf I once bought her, the one she'd tucked away months ago. I reached for her hand across the table, and she didn't pull away. That night, I left a note on her pillow. "See you? I still see you." She smiled when she read it, and for the first time in a long while, I saw a flicker of the woman I fell in love with. Maybe she saw a piece of the man she used to trust too. We weren't magically fixed. There were still days when we slipped into old habits, when exhaustion muted our efforts. But the difference now was intention. We were both trying. And trying is a form of love too. We made a ritual out of the mundane. Saturday mornings became our sacred time. We'd walk to the market, buy fresh bread and flowers, and sit in the park with coffee in hand. We rarely talked during those moments. We didn't need to. The silence between us had changed. It wasn't a chasm anymore. It was a blanket, a comfort. She started drawing again, something she hadn't done in years. I watched her sketch at the kitchen table, the tip of her tongue poking out as she concentrated. She said it made her feel like herself again. I started writing again, quietly, late at night when the world was asleep. Short reflections, fragments of thoughts, pieces of us captured in ink. She found one of my notebooks once and read a few pages without asking. I didn't mind. In fact, I left it open the next night, hoping she'd read more. We began learning each other again. Not who we were, but who we were becoming. Because people change. That's inevitable. But the willingness to keep discovering each other, that's what sustains love. Still, despite all this effort, something lingered. A shadow that neither of us wanted to acknowledge. And then, one evening it happened. The moment I'd feared, the one I thought we were working so hard to avoid. She told me she got a job offer. Abroad. 6 months, temporary, but very far. I didn't know what to say. My throat tightened. My hands went cold. I asked if she was going to take it. She looked at me with a softness that shattered me. I want to, but I don't want to lose us. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake listening to her breathe, trying to imagine mornings without her beside me, evenings without her humming in the kitchen. I tried to picture her halfway across the world, thriving in a new city, and me back here, waiting. I hated it, but I also knew I couldn't ask her to stay. Love is not a cage, and hers had always had wings. The next morning I told her to go, to take the job, to live fully. She cried. I cried. But there was no bitterness, just grief. Grief that something good was changing. She promised to write every day. I promised to read every word. The night before her flight, we stayed up till dawn, watching the sky turn from black to gold. We held each other like we were memorizing the shape of our grief. And when it was time, I took her to the airport. She kissed me once, hard and trembling, then walked away without looking back. I stood there until I couldn't see her anymore. And then I went home, to our apartment, to her scent still lingering in the hallway, to the silence that now felt like a wound. For the first few weeks, we wrote constantly. Emails, letters, postcards. She sent pictures of sunsets and street corners. I sent her poems and pages from my notebook. We were apart, but it didn't feel like a loss. It felt like a stretch. Painful, but full of hope. But then, slowly, her messages came less often. The calls grew shorter. The distance started pressing down. I told myself she was busy, that it was normal. But one night, she missed our call entirely. No message. No apology, just silence. I stayed up staring at the ceiling, that old atch clawing its way back. The next morning, I found a letter in the mail. Not an email, not a text. A real letter, handwritten. The envelope was creased, the ink slightly smudged. I sat down to read it, my hands trembling. The first line stopped my heart. I made a mistake. She had kissed someone. It was brief, impulsive, meaningless. Her words, but not meaningless to me. She said it didn't mean she didn't love me, that it only made her realize how much she missed me, how irreplaceable our connection was. She begged me to believe her, to forgive her, to let us have a second chance. And I didn't know what to feel. Rage, hurt, confusion, longing, all of it tangled into a storm. I closed the letter and sat in the quiet, waiting for the emotion to settle. It didn't. Days passed, then a week. Then another letter came. This time, no apology, just a story of her walking through the city, remembering something I once said. A story about regret, about how she stood on a bridge and thought about jumping, not literally but metaphorically. About ending things, about walking away. But she didn't. She turned around and went home. And she wrote this: I want to fix us this. I want to fix us, if you let me. And then to meet me. One last time. If you come, I'll know you still believe in us. The date, the place. A cafe in the same city, 1 month from now. And now here I am, holding the letter, staring at the calendar, wondering if showing up means strength or weakness, wondering if love can survive broken trust, wondering if sometimes forgiveness is the only way to move forward. Not to forget, but to rewrite the story. I haven't decided yet, but I keep the letter in my jacket, just in case. Because sometimes the smallest things are the ones that crack the world wide open. The days leading up to that meeting felt longer than any I'd known. Time seemed to dilate around my indecision, stretching each moment into a question I couldn't yet answer. Some mornings, I would wake with a burning certainty that I wouldn't go, that seeing her again would only reopen wounds that had barely begun to scar. But then, by nightfall, I'd catch myself checking train schedules or imagining what I'd wear, how I'd look at her, what I might say. I couldn't escape the pull of that letter, the quiet desperation tucked between its lines. She hadn't begged, she hadn't justified, she'd simply laid herself bare. And that was what haunted me. Not the betrayal itself, but her fragile hope in the aftermath. I wasn't sure what unsettled me more, the idea of forgiving her, or the idea of not forgiving her and always wondering if I'd let something irreplaceable slip through my hands. I tried to busy myself. I worked longer hours, filled my evenings with errands and long walks, but everything led back to her. She had left fingerprints on everything in my life, from the chipped mug in the cupboard to the way I folded my laundry. Her way because she said it saved space, and I'd never bothered to go back. Even in her absence, she was everywhere. I went to that little market we used to visit, pretending I was just there for fresh bread. But I found myself staring too long at a jar of fig jam we once argued about. I stood there like an idiot, a grown man immobilized by a condiment, because in that moment it felt like I was touching something sacred, something lost. A week before the date she mentioned in the letter, I found myself at the park where we used to spend our Saturday mornings. The same bench, the same patch of sunlight filtering through half bare branches. I sat there for a long time, watching people pass, wondering if any of them were caught in their own versions of my torment. Did anyone else have a heart that split between anger and longing, between pride and fear? I closed my eyes and tried to remember what it felt like to love her before the distance, before the silence, before the fracture. And for a moment I did. It wasn't a memory. I swear it was something more. A sensation, a trace of the warmth she once left on my skin like perfume. I opened my eyes and suddenly I knew I would go. Not because I was sure she deserved it. Not because I was ready. But because the story of us deserved an ending. Not a fade out. Not a ghosting. But something real. Something with weight. If it ended, I needed to look her in the eyes and know I'd done everything I could. And if it didn't, if it somehow began again, then I wanted to be there at the very moment the pieces started to move back together. I booked the ticket 2 days in advance. A quiet, mid-morning train. I packed lightly. Just a change of clothes, a worn notebook, and her last letter folded into my wallet. I couldn't eat that morning. I sipped coffee and watched the steam vanish the way we sometimes do with the things we don't know how to hold. When I boarded the train, the seat next to me was empty, and for some reason, that made me anxious, like the universe was preparing a space for something I wasn't ready to face. I watched the countryside slip by, yellow fields and gray skies, and tried to breathe evenly. I wrote a little, scratched some thoughts into the notebook. One line stuck with me sometimes: the bravest thing isn't staying. Sometimes, it's walking into the possibility of healing, even if you don't know what you'll find. The city greeted me with cold air and a silence that felt unfamiliar. I hadn't been here since we last traveled together. Everything looked the same, but it was like seeing it through the wrong lens. Distorted by memory. I arrived an hour early, paced around the neighborhood where the cafe was. I walked past it 3 times without going in. My heart was pounding, my palms slick. I was furious with myself for being nervous. This was a woman I'd shared my soul with, cried in front of, kissed under 100 streetlights. And yet now, she felt like someone I was about to meet for the first time. Eventually, I went inside. It was quieter than I remembered. A couple by the window, a man reading in the corner. I chose a table near the back, half hidden but with a clear view of the door. I ordered tea, though I wouldn't touch it. The steam rose untouched, the same way it had at home that morning. And then the door opened, and there she was. She looked smaller somehow. Not physically, but in presence, like she'd been folded into herself, reduced by guilt and distance, and all the questions that had no answers. But when her eyes met mine, I saw something familiar. Not the old fire, not the spark of reunion, but the quiet ache of recognition. She walked slowly, as if unsure the ground would hold, and sat down without a word. We stared at each other for a long time, the air between us thick with all the things we weren't sure how to say. Then she reached into her coat and pulled out another letter. She slid it across the table like it was fragile. I didn't touch it. I just looked at her. "I wrote this before I knew you'd come," she said softly. "But I wanted to give it to you anyway." I nodded but said nothing. She continued. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I just needed you to know I've spent every day since that night wishing I could go back. Not to undo it. I know I can't. But to make a different choice. To remember who we were, who I was with you." Her voice broke. She looked away. "I was lonely," she said. "Not for someone else. For myself. I thought I could fill that emptiness with something fleeting. I thought it wouldn't matter. But the moment it happened, I knew I'd made the biggest mistake of my life. And I came home, and all I wanted to do was tell you. But I was scared. Scared that I'd broken something sacred. And I had. Still, I said nothing. My throat was tight. My hands trembled beneath the table. She finally looked at me again. "I don't want to be forgiven out of pity, or habit, or because we were good once. I want to be forgiven only if you still believe in what we had, in what we could still build." I exhaled slowly. I looked at her, really looked at her, and I saw all of it. The girl who left notes in my coat. The woman who slept with her face toward mine. The stranger who kissed someone else. And the person sitting across from me now, bearing her soul, waiting for an answer. I picked up the letter. I didn't open it. I just held it. "I'm not ready," I said. "Not yet." She nodded. Her eyes glistened, but she didn't cry. I think part of her expected that answer, maybe even hoped for it, because some things can't be rushed. Some wounds don't close on demand. But, I added, I came? That has to mean something. A faint smile ghosted her lips. It does? She whispered. We sat in silence for a while after that. No promises, no endings. Just two people who had shared something beautiful and broken and maybe, just maybe, could still find a way to hold it in their hands again. When we finally stood, she didn't ask if I would write. I didn't promise I would call. We just hugged briefly. And in that hug, I felt it again. The memory, the possibility. I walked away first, not because I wanted to end it, but because I knew if I turned around, I might never let go. That night in my hotel room, I opened the letter. It wasn't a plea. It wasn't even a love letter. It was a story of how we met, from her eyes. Every moment, every nuance, every feeling she'd never told me at the time. She ended it with one line. So even if this is all that remains, I will always be grateful that it happened. I closed the letter. I held it against my chest. And I cried. Not because it was over, but because, for the first time in a long time, I finally understood what it meant to love someone enough to let go of the version of them that hurt you, and wait patiently to meet the version who could heal you. The days after I returned home were silent in a different way than before. Not the kind of silence that screams of something missing, but the heavy, still kind that comes when your heart is in recovery, processing a weight it hasn't yet decided to keep or release. I moved slowly through familiar routines, careful not to disturb the fragile balance that had taken root in me. It was as though by stepping lightly, I could avoid cracking the thin ice of clarity forming beneath me. I didn't reach out to her. She didn't write. For the first time in our shared history, there was no expectation tethering us. No? Should? No? When? No roadmap. Only the echo of what we had been and the shadow of what we might still become. I didn't burn her letters, nor did I read them again. I kept them in a drawer next to my bed, their presence more important than their contents now. They were evidence, not of betrayal or regret, but of effort, of an attempt to preserve something with trembling hands, even after it had fractured. I started walking in the evenings again, something I hadn't done since she left. The air was cooler now, the kind that signals a season's end. I wandered past old places, her favorite bakery, the corner where we once got caught in the rain and laughed like children, the bookstore where she first took my hand and didn't let go. Everything was the same, and yet not. The world had not paused to mourn what we'd lost. It had kept spinning, as it always does. But I was different now. There was a strange freedom in the uncertainty, a quiet strength in not knowing what came next. For the first time, I wasn't chasing closure. I was letting it come to me, if it ever did. And slowly, without realizing it, I began to heal. I picked up the pen again, not just to jot down fleeting thoughts, but to write, really write. Pages and pages of memories, not all of them happy, but all of them real. I didn't try to make sense of them or thread them into a lesson. I simply let them live, messy and raw and beautiful in their own right. Writing her back had crossed my mind countless times, but every draft I began felt dishonest. Too careful, too constructed, so I stopped trying to reply and instead wrote for myself, about who I was when we met, who I became in her presence, who I am now alone. It felt like meeting myself again after years apart. Then, one rainy morning, a package arrived. No return address, no note, just a small box wrapped in brown paper. Inside was her camera, the old film one she'd brought the night we shared strawberries and silence before we knew what we were. And with it, a roll of undeveloped film and a folded photolab receipt from a shop near her new city. No explanation, no message, just that. I sat with it for hours. I turned the camera over in my hands, traced the scratches on its body, felt the residue of her fingers still etched into the grip. What did it mean? Was it a goodbye? A beginning? An apology? I took the roll to a local photo store. The owner told me it would take a few days. I left my number and walked away with a strange itch blooming in my chest. The waiting reminded me of her, how she always said film was a metaphor for love. You never really know what you've captured until it's too late to change it. Those days felt suspended, floating between interpretation and acceptance. I kept imagining what might be on those photographs. Us, in those final weeks before she left. Her, alone in a foreign city. Or maybe something entirely unexpected. A visual message she couldn't put into words. When the call came, I rushed to the shop without even grabbing my coat. The photos were in a plain white envelope, sealed with a single piece of tape. I walked to the park across the street and sat on a bench, heart thudding, hands trembling. And then I opened them. The first image was blurry, an accidental shutter press, probably. But the next was sharp, a table set for two, candles flickering, the corner of her old apartment. Then a mirror selfie, her eyes tired but soft. A handwritten sign taped to the mirror that said, "Day 7, still thinking of you." Each photo after that was like a breadcrumb trail through her solitude. A shadow on a wall that resembled my profile. A park bench with our initials carved in it. Her reflection in a puddle. A sunrise. A bookstore shelf lined with poetry. A single page from a novel with a line underlined dead. Love is not about never hurting each other. It's about choosing to come back anyway. And then the final image of her, standing in the middle of a street at night, looking directly into the camera. No smile. No performance. Just her raw and open, eyes full of everything she couldn't say. I sat there for a long time, flipping through them again and again. The photos didn't fix anything. They didn't erase what had been done. But they were proof. Of memory. Of feeling. Of effort. She had documented her regret, her yearning, her process. She had taken all the pieces of what we were and tried to preserve them the only way she knew how. That night, I placed the photographs on my wall, not as decoration but as a map, a testament to everything we'd survived. I didn't know if they pointed forward or back. I just knew they mattered. Weeks passed. Autumn deepened. The leaves turned gold and then brown and then began to disappear entirely. I began volunteering at a small community center downtown, helping kids write stories. Something about teaching them to find their voices helped me rediscover my own. They reminded me that beginnings are always hidden inside endings, waiting for us to look deeper. And then one evening, as I was locking up, I found an envelope slipped under the door of my apartment. It wasn't her handwriting. Inside was a ticket. A return trip. The same city where we'd last met. No message, just the ticket. I stared at it, unsure what to feel. Was this from her? A sign? A coincidence? A test? My instinct screamed caution. But a quieter voice inside me, the one that had been growing louder lately, whispered that some chances don't wait around forever. I didn't pack right away. I didn't decide overnight. But a few days later, I found myself booking the return leg, just in case. When I arrived, the city felt different. Or maybe I was. I didn't text her. I didn't knock on any doors. I just walked, letting my feet guide me as if they might remember the way before my mind did. I ended up at the cafe where we last saw each other. It was quieter now. The weather had turned, and most people preferred indoor warmth to outdoor nostalgia. I sat at the same table. I ordered tea. I left the seat across from me empty. I waited and waited, but she didn't come. I checked the time, the date. I wondered if I'd misunderstood, if the ticket meant something else entirely, if I'd come all this way to stand in the space where we'd once been and realize I was alone after all. Just as I was about to leave, the waiter approached me. "Are you the man from the photographs?" he asked, his accent soft. I blinked. "What?" He pulled something from behind the counter. A small parcel. "A woman came last week. Said someone might come for this. Told me to give it only if he looked like he still loved her." I must have looked confused, but he smiled gently and handed me the box. I opened it on the train ride back. Inside was another roll of film. A note that said only, "If you develop this, you'll know my answer." And beneath it, one final thing. The very first note she ever wrote me, faded and fragile but intact. Breathe, breathe. You're doing better than you think. I sat back in my seat, the city vanishing behind me, her memory pressing close like breath on glass. I didn't cry this time. I just smiled. Because somehow, even after all this time, she still knew exactly what I needed to hear. I waited 3 days before developing the film. Not out of fear or hesitation, but because I wanted to live with the possibility a little longer. Those 3 days were unlike any others. I was suspended between two versions of reality, one where her final roll of film held a message, an answer, maybe even a roadmap forward, and another where it held nothing but fragments of goodbye, and that would be the last thread connecting us. I didn't tell anyone. Not about the cafe. Not about the parcel. Not about the note or the second roll of film. It felt too delicate, too sacred to say out loud. Speaking it might reduce it to something ordinary, and nothing about us, no matter how fractured, had ever been ordinary. Instead, I filled the silence with preparation. I reorganized my apartment, not in a symbolic way, but in the way one might clear space for something new without even realizing it. I took down the wall of her photographs, carefully placing each one into a leather-bound album I hadn't used in years. Every image, from her mirror selfie to the bookstore shelf to that haunting final shot of her standing in the streetlight, was tucked in like pressed flowers. Frozen moments I wasn't ready to part with, but no longer needed to display to remember. It wasn't moving on. It was making room. And I think that's what healing quietly demands of us. On the morning of the third day, I returned to the same photo lab. The owner remembered me, offered a tight smile, and promised the prints would be ready by the end of the afternoon. I left my number again, but I didn't wait for the call. I sat at the park across the street, the same one where I'd once unsealed her memories on paper. But this time, there was no urgency. I watched the leaves fall. Children played. A man painted watercolors on the edge of the fountain. The world moved on, unaware that someone nearby was on the verge of reopening his entire life. By evening, the envelope was in my hands. No name, no writing, just the same plain white envelope with the slight curve of photographs inside. I walked the long way home, my grip tightening with every block, until I finally stood at my kitchen table, hands trembling over the flap. I opened it. The first image was of a note. My handwriting, folded into the crease of a coat pocket. The note said, "I see you. I still see you." She had photographed the note I left on her pillow all those weeks ago. The second image, a close-up of her hand resting on that pillow, her fingers brushing the edges. I hadn't known she'd seen it, let alone captured it. The third was her reflection in a train window, camera in hand, looking hollowed out by longing. Then came a series of images that told a silent story. Her sitting on various benches across the city, each one from a different day, in different clothes, seasons shifting subtly in the background. Always waiting, always alone. One photo showed her in a bookstore, standing near a shelf labeled "Forgiveness and Redemption." She wasn't looking at the camera, maybe she'd set a timer. But her expression said everything. She was wary, not just from guilt, but from hoping, from believing in something uncertain. And then, nestled deep in the stack, came a photograph that broke me. It was of me, taken from a distance. Through the glass of that cafe, the day I waited for her. I hadn't seen her. She must have arrived early, sat across the street, and captured me in my waiting. I looked small. Not pitiful, not lost, but vulnerable in a way I hadn't allowed myself to be in years. The next image was empty. The same table, the same chair. But I was gone. A before and after of longing and absence. Then came the final photograph. No buildings, no bench, no bookstore, just her. Sitting in a sun-drenched field, legs tucked beneath her, arms around her knees, smiling. Not the curated smile she wore for others, but the one I used to know. A soft, genuine thing that didn't demand attention. Her eyes squinted slightly at the light, hair messy, face bare. Written at the bottom corner in smudged pen, "If you're holding this, I still choose you." I dropped the photo and sat down. For a long time, I didn't move. I didn't speak, I just breathed. In. out, in, out, trying to anchor myself in the enormity of what I'd just seen. Her answer wasn't a question. It wasn't an ultimatum. It wasn't even an apology anymore. It was a quiet, unwavering offering, not a demand to return, but a declaration that she would wait, however long it took, for me to believe in us again. I wish I could say I called her that night, that I ran into the street, got on a train, and knocked on her door. But I didn't, because love, when it's been cracked open, isn't healed by impulse, it's rebuilt by presence, by choice. And I needed to choose, not out of loneliness or habit or nostalgia, but because I was ready to hold what she was offering again. So I wrote her a letter. I didn't plan it. I didn't outline it. I just let my hand move. I told her I'd seen the photos, that they undid me in the most beautiful way. I told her I wasn't sure what I believed anymore. About fate, about timing, about forgiveness. But I knew that I still believed in the dangerous possibility of us. I wrote that I didn't want to erase the pain or pretend the fracture hadn't happened, but I was willing to stand beside it with her and build something honest on top of it. That I missed her. But more than that, I wanted her. Not as the woman I'd once loved, but as the one she'd become through the fire. At the bottom, I included a single sentence. Meet me again. One last time, not to begin again, but to begin differently. And then, like she had done for me, I included a train ticket. I mailed it without overthinking, placed it in the box with a calm heart, and walked away. I didn't set expectations. I didn't check my inbox. I went back to living, not waiting but moving, however slowly, towards something that felt real. A week passed. Then 2. Then 3. And then, on the 4th Saturday, I woke to find an envelope beneath my door. Her handwriting. Inside, a photograph. A park bench. The same one from our old Saturday mornings. Empty. Except for a note taped to the slats. I squinted. The photo was grainy, but I could just make out the words. Tomorrow. 10 a.m. I stood there in my kitchen, heart pounding like it had the first time she smiled at me across a crowded bookstore. And I knew. This was it. Not a fine ale. Not a dramatic reunion, but the moment we chose. Together. To no longer live inside the story of what was, but to step quietly into the story of what might still be. The next morning, the sky was washed in soft gray, the kind of sky that holds back rain but never quite releases it. I dressed without fanfare. No overthinking, no rehearsed lines, no cologne sprayed with intention. Just clothes, shoes, and the quiet weight of what I was walking toward. As I made my way to the park, time didn't feel like it was moving in minutes, but in heartbeats, each one louder than the last. I arrived 5 minutes early. The bench was empty. That felt right somehow. I sat down, hands in my pockets, eyes scanning the stillness around me. Children's laughter echoed distantly. Dogs barked, leaves rustled, and the world carried on like this wasn't the most important moment of my life. But for me, it was this bench, this park, this hour. All of it sacred. Then I saw her. No umbrella, just her. Her walk slower than I remembered, but steady. Intentional. She saw me immediately, but didn't wave or rush. She simply approached with the same gentleness she used to move through our apartment late at night, when I was already half asleep, not wanting to wake me. When she finally stood before me, she didn't sit down right away. She looked at me like she was absorbing something wordless, reading a page I hadn't written yet. I stood up, not knowing why, just feeling that I couldn't stay seated while she stood in front of me like that. Like a question I'd waited too long to answer. She reached into her coat pocket and held something out. It was a small object wrapped in tissue paper. I took it, unwrapped it slowly, unsure of what I'd find. It was the first note I'd ever written her. The one I'd thought was long gone. The simple line, "Do you still feel it too? Or am I the only one holding on?" She had kept it. All this time. Her eyes were wet but not falling. Mine too. She finally sat down, and I joined her. For a moment, we didn't speak. The silence wasn't awkward, it was full. Brimming. Then, softly, she said, "Thought about this moment every day." I nodded. So did I. We didn't dive into apologies. We didn't dissect the past. We let it sit with us like an old friend, acknowledged and no longer feared. The betrayal, the silence, the letters, the photographs, it was all part of the tapestry now. Neither of us could pretend it hadn't happened, and neither of us needed to. She pulled her knees up slightly, arms around them like she used to do when she was nervous. I smiled. She noticed. "What?" she asked. "You still do that?" I said. "Wrap yourself up like the world's too cold for you." She laughed. Not loudly, but enough. "Maybe it is," she said. "Or maybe I'm just learning to feel it again." That hit me harder than I expected, because I knew exactly what she meant. I reached into my coat and pulled out the final photo from her roll. The one with her sitting in the field, smiling, the words at the bottom inked in her own hands. "If you're holding this, I still choose you." I handed it to her. She looked down at it and closed her eyes for a second longer than normal. Then she whispered, "I meant it." "I know," I replied. "I believe you." And I did. She turned toward me then, fully, and asked the only question that mattered. "So what now?" I could have said 1,000 things. I could have laid out conditions, boundaries, a cautious roadmap of how to move forward without tripping over the past. But instead, I said, "We don't start over. We start." She nodded. "No resistance, no fear, just acceptance." "Different?" she repeated. "I think I like that better." So we walked. No destination, just movement. We passed the bakery, now closed on Sundays. We stood outside the bookstore but didn't go in. We walked through the neighborhood where she used to live, and at one point, she pointed up at a window and said, "I used to sit there and think about whether I'd ever see you again." I didn't say anything. I just reached for her hand. And this time, she didn't hesitate. Her fingers slid into mine like they never left. But they had, and that was what made it matter now. Not because we were pretending to be who we once were, but because we were choosing to meet each other again as we were now. Older, softer, braver. We ended up at the same train station I had arrived at weeks ago, both of us leaning on the railing, watching the tracks curve into the distance. I turned to her and asked, "Why the photographs?" She smiled without looking at me. "Because words can lie," she said. "But photos, they hold truth, even when you're not ready to see it." I didn't take them for you. Not at first. I took them to prove to myself that I still felt something, that I hadn't gone completely numb. I considered that. It made sense. And yet, she'd given them to me. Trusted me with her process, her proof, her pain. I would never forget that. The sky began to darken, and the first drops of rain finally fell. We didn't run. We stood there, getting wet, letting it soak into our hair and jackets. It felt cleansing, necessary. When she finally turned to me again, she said, "I can't promise I'll never disappoint you again." I shook my head. "I don't want promises. I want presence." She smiled. And it was the real one again. The one she'd worn in that field. The one I thought I'd lost forever. We didn't define what we were as we walked back to her apartment. We didn't label it or script a plan. We made tea. We changed into dry clothes. We sat on the floor and read old letters we had once hidden from each other. She showed me drawings she'd made, all variations of a single image, a cracked glass heart, stitched with thread. I showed her pages from my journal, where I'd written versions of her I missed and versions of me I wasn't proud of. There was no bitterness left, no anger. Only the slow stitching of something new. Days passed. Then weeks. We didn't move in together. We didn't post anything online. We didn't even tell many people. What we had now wasn't for show. It was quiet and small and private, but strong, steady. We began leaving each other notes again. Not daily, not out of routine, but in moments when it mattered. I found one tucked into my wallet one morning that simply said, "You chose me. I won't forget." I left one under her pillow that read, "You came back. I'll never take that lightly." Our love wasn't loud anymore. It wasn't urgent or desperate or designed to impress. It was slow burning, soft spoken. It fit into our lives like breath, present even when unnoticed. We still had hard days, times when insecurities rose up and memories hurt. But now, instead of retreating, we talked. We learned to hold each other without fixing, to listen without defending. We forgave without forgetting, because forgetting would mean losing the lessons. One night, months later, as we sat on the roof watching the city pulse below us, she asked me, "Do you ever wish we never broke?" I thought about it. "No," I said. Because if we hadn't, we wouldn't have built this. She looked at me, something glowing in her eyes. "This," she whispered, "is better." And I agreed. Because what we had now wasn't built on illusion. It was built on truth, on survival, on two people who chose each other not out of need, but out of want, every single day. Not despite the pain, but because of it. Because we knew what it felt like to lose. And we chose, over and over, not to. And so, without a wedding, without a grand finale, without declarations shouted from rooftops, we did the only thing love really asks of anyone. We stayed, we showed up, and together we began, different and perfect and deeply, achingly real. Enjoyed the video? Give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and tap the bell so you never miss an update.